My name is Ethan, and I live in the small, quiet town of Bellwood, a place where everyone knows everyone else. I've always enjoyed hosting dinner parties at my house, bringing friends together for a good meal and conversation. It was a warm summer evening in June when I decided to host another dinner gathering, inviting a few close friends over. Little did I know, that night would evolve into a mystery that would haunt me for years to come. I spent the whole day preparing. The dining table was set with my best dishes, and the rich aroma of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread filled the house. As the sun set, casting a soft, golden light through the windows, my friends began to arrive. Sarah, Mark, Lisa, and John were all there, along with a new face, Ben, a guy who had recently moved to town. Ben was quiet, reserved, and kept mostly to himself, but I thought it would be nice to include him. He seemed grateful to be invited, and I hoped he'd warm up to the group. We gathered around the table, laughing and sharing stories as we ate. The evening went smoothly, with everyone enjoying the food and each other's company. After dessert, we moved to the living room to continue chatting. Ben, however, seemed unusually quiet. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was shy or just wasn't as comfortable as the rest of us. But as the evening went on, his mood shifted. He became tense, irritable, barely speaking and avoiding eye contact. I noticed, but didn't want to embarrass him by drawing attention to it. Eventually, without warning, he stood up abruptly, muttered something about needing to leave, and before any of us could respond, he was gone, slamming the door behind him. We sat there in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. After a few moments, we tried to brush it off and continued the evening, but the mood had shifted. The conversations felt forced, and the night gradually came to an end. My friends said their goodbyes, all still puzzled by Ben's sudden departure. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to check on Ben, hoping to find out what had upset him. I went to his house, but when I knocked, there was no answer. His car was in the driveway, but it seemed as though no one was home. I left, figuring he might just need some space. A few days went by, and I still hadn't heard from him. I reached out to my friends, but no one had seen or heard from him either. Growing more concerned, I decided to report him missing to the police. The police took my statement and assured me they would look into it. Weeks passed, then months. There was still no sign of Ben. The police had searched his house, spoken with neighbors, and followed every lead, but it was as if he had vanished without a trace. My friends and I were left with more questions than answers. One evening, I found myself replaying the events of that night over and over in my mind. What had caused Ben to leave so suddenly? I couldn't help but feel responsible, wondering if I had missed some subtle sign, or if there was something more I could have done to stop it. Determined to find answers, I began to dig into Ben's past. I learned that he had moved to Bellwood after a painful breakup, hoping for a fresh start. He didn't have many friends, and his family lived far away. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how little I actually knew about him. One night, while I was alone in my house, I heard something strange outside, a faint rustling, like someone moving through the bushes. My heart pounded as I peered out the window, but all I could see was the darkness. The noise stopped, and I tried to convince myself it was just an animal. But over the next few nights, the noises returned. Footsteps, whispers, a constant feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake the sense that someone or something was out there. My sleep became restless, and I was constantly on edge. Then, one evening, I discovered an old journal in Ben's house that the police had missed. It was filled with his thoughts and feelings, showing a troubled mind. As I read, I saw his growing paranoia and fear. The last entry, dated the night of the dinner party, sent a chill down my spine. It read, "I can't escape it. It's always watching, always waiting. I need to leave before it's too late." I shared the journal with the police, but it didn't provide any concrete answers. They continued their investigation, but the trail had gone cold. As time passed, the memory of that night began to fade for everyone except me. I couldn't let it go, haunted by the unknown. I often found myself staring into the darkness, listening for those faint noises, wondering if Ben was out there somewhere, lost and scared. My friends tried to comfort me, but the mystery remained unsolved. Ben was gone, and we might never know what happened to him. The dinner party that had been such a pleasant evening for everyone else left a shadow over my life, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary moments can become the most inexplicable mysteries. A few years ago, my son Daniel was brought home late one night by his friend Noah. Daniel was 21 at the time and had been out with some friends. I was already in bed when I heard the front door creak open. I quickly got up to see what was going on. As I reached the living room, I saw Noah struggling to support Daniel, who could barely stand on his own. His clothes were disheveled, and his eyes were half closed, a clear sign he had drunk too much. Noah was a tall, muscular young man who seemed to manage Daniel's weight easily. "Sorry about this," Noah said, his voice steady. "Dan had a bit too much to drink," I nodded, concern for my son overshadowing any frustration I might have felt. "Let's get into his room," I said, moving to help. Together, we managed to get Daniel up the stairs and into his bed. He mumbled incoherently, his head lolling to the side. I pulled off his shoes and tucked him in, hoping he'd sleep it off and feel better in the morning. Noah watched for a moment before turning to leave. "Thanks for bringing him home," I said, feeling relieved now that Daniel was safe. "No problem," Noah replied with a small smile. "I'll check on him tomorrow." With that, Noah left, and I returned to my room, hoping to get some sleep. The next day, Daniel was groggy but otherwise fine. He didn't remember much from the previous night, just that he had been out with friends and had too much to drink. Life continued as usual, and I didn't think much more about that night. A year later, everything changed. One evening, while I was watching the news, a breaking story caught my attention. The reporter was standing in front of a hotel, describing a horrific crime that had taken place. My heart sank as I listened. "A young man was found dead in his hotel room earlier today," the reporter said. "The victim, whose name has not been released, was reportedly checked into the hotel by a friend the previous night. Police are now searching for the friend, who is considered a suspect." A chill ran down my spine. Something about the story felt disturbingly familiar. I watched, horrified, as the reporter continued. "According to witnesses, the suspect was seen leaving the hotel early this morning. Police have released this sketch of the suspect." The screen flashed a drawing of a man that looked eerily like Noah. My heart pounded in my chest. Could it be him? The thought was almost too much to bear. I immediately called Daniel. He answered on the third ring, his voice still sleepy. "Dan, turn on the news," I said urgently. "There's something you need to see." A few minutes later, he called back. His voice was now fully awake and filled with shock. "What do we do?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. "We need to call the police." We did just that, and soon detectives were at our house asking questions about Noah. Daniel told them everything he knew about the night Noah brought him home drunk and how they had been friends for years. The detectives took notes, their faces grim. Days turned into weeks as the search for Noah continued. The story was everywhere on the news, in the papers, and all over town. The more I learned, the more horrified I became. Not only had Noah gotten Daniel drunk, but he had also checked him into the hotel, only to kill him and then flee the scene. The brutality of the crime was unimaginable. Daniel was deeply shaken. He couldn't believe that his friend, someone he had trusted for so long, could do something so terrible. He became withdrawn, spending most of his time in his room. I tried to comfort him, but there were no words that could ease the pain. One night, a few weeks after the news broke, Daniel and I sat in the living room. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Daniel was staring at the floor, lost in thought. "Mom," he said, finally breaking the silence, "do you think I could have been next?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. I didn't know what to say. The thought had crossed my mind too many times, but it was something I tried to push away. "I don't know, Daniel," I said softly. "But you're safe now, and that's what matters." The police eventually found Noah. He had fled to a neighboring state and was hiding in a rundown motel. His capture brought some relief, but the scars he left behind were deep. The trial was long and painful, with details of the crime coming to light that were almost too much to bear. In the end, Noah was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But for Daniel and me, life would never be the same. The fear, the betrayal, and the sense of violation we felt lingered, casting a long shadow over our lives. Daniel struggled to move on, haunted by the knowledge that someone he had considered a friend was capable of such evil. Years have passed since then, but the memories remain. Daniel has tried to rebuild his life, but there are moments when I still see the pain in his eyes, a reminder of the nightmare we lived through. The experience taught us both a hard lesson about trust and the darkness that can hide within people we think we know. We still talk about that night sometimes, the night Noah brought Daniel home. It serves as a stark reminder of how close we came to losing everything. Though we've tried to move forward, the shadows of that time are never far behind. Last October, my friends and I decided to go for a late-night drive. We were bored and looking for an adventure. It was a crisp, clear evening, and the moonlight made the empty roads look surreal and mysterious. There were 4 of us in the car, me, Ben, Mike, and Lucy. We drove aimlessly, laughing and blasting music, but soon the conversation shifted to ghost stories. Someone mentioned an old, abandoned house at the edge of town. We should go there, Mike suggested with a mischievous grin. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. We all agreed, and Ben, who was driving, turned the car in the direction of the house. The roads grew narrower and bumpier as we got closer. Tall trees lined the path, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers in the moonlight. Finally, we saw the old house. It stood at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by overgrown bushes and tall grass. The house was massive, with broken windows and a sagging roof. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The headlights from the car cast eerie shadows on the crumbling walls, making it look even more sinister. We parked the car a little down the road, not wanting to draw attention to ourselves. As we walked towards the house, the air grew colder, and I could hear our footsteps crunching on the gravel. My heart was pounding, and I could tell my friends were nervous too. We reached the front door, which was hanging off its hinges. Ben pushed it open with a groan, and we stepped inside. The air inside was thick and musty. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows on the dusty floor. The house was completely silent, except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. We split up to explore. Lucy and I went upstairs, while Ben and Mike stayed on the ground floor. The stairs groaned under our weight, and each step echoed through the empty house. Upstairs, we found old furniture covered in white sheets, broken picture frames, and cobwebs in every corner. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lucy and I moved from room to room, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. In one of the rooms, I found an old diary on a dusty table. I picked it up and tried to open it, but the pages were too faded to read. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from downstairs. My heart jumped into my throat. Ben? Mike, I called out, but there was no answer. We hurried back down the stairs. The living room was empty, but the front door was now closed. We hadn't heard it shut. A sense of dread washed over me. Something wasn't right. "Let's find them and get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. We moved through the house, checking each room. The kitchen was empty, as was the dining room. As we entered the last room, a small storage space at the back of the house, we found Ben and Mike standing still, staring at something on the floor. I followed their gaze and saw what they were looking at: a trap door. "Did you open this?" I asked. Mike shook his head. It was already open when we got here. A cold draft rose up from the trapdoor, sending chills down my spine. The darkness below seemed to swallow the light from our flashlights. Against my better judgment, we decided to go down. The narrow wooden ladder creaked as we descended into the basement. The basement was damp and cold, the walls lined with shelves filled with dusty jars and old tools. In the corner, a small flickering light caught our attention. We cautiously approached it and found an old lantern hanging from a nail in the wall. Its dim glow barely illuminated the room. Suddenly, we heard footsteps above us. Someone else was in the house. My heart hammered in my chest. We turned off our flashlights and stood still, listening. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer to the trapdoor. We held our breath, hoping whoever it was would leave. But the footsteps stopped right above us. Then, slowly, the trapdoor began to creak open. A figure appeared at the top of the ladder, silhouetted against the dim light from the living room. It was a man tall and thin, with wild hair and eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. He climbed down the ladder, and we backed away, trying to stay out of his sight. The man moved slowly, methodically, as if he was searching for something. He muttered to himself in a language we couldn't understand. I could feel my friends trembling beside me. We needed to get out of there, but the only way was past him. Suddenly, the man stopped and turned his head, locking eyes with me. A cold smile spread across his face. He started walking toward us, and panic set in. We bolted for the ladder, scrambling up as fast as we could. Ben went first, followed by Lucy, then me, and finally Mike. As we reached the top, the man grabbed Mike's ankle, pulling him back down. Mike kicked and struggled, and we all grabbed him, pulling with all our strength. Finally, Mike broke free, and we slammed the trapdoor shut, locking it with a rusty bolt. We didn't stop to catch our breath. We ran out of the house, through the front door, and straight to the car. Ben started the engine, and the tires screeched as we sped away, not looking back. As we drove away, the house disappeared into the darkness behind us. We didn't speak for the rest of the ride, too shaken by what had just happened. The thrill of the night drive had turned into a nightmare. We'd found our adventure, but it was one we never wanted to repeat. From that night on, we never spoke of the abandoned house again. The memory of the man and his eerie smile haunted me for weeks. Even now, when I drive past the edge of town, I feel a chill run down my spine, and I speed up, not wanting to be reminded of that terrifying night.